Dispelling the myths. I mean, basically what we're trying to do, Dr. Hills and I are kind of swimming upstream, but the science is behind us with our techniques. I mean, we both have a common kind of philosophy that people should take care of themselves and not have to rely on, you know, just give me a pill for this and a drug for that, because in the long run, you're barking up the wrong alley. Okay, exercise, diet, pretty much the way to go. I might use some technical terms. I try not to. I try not to be a PhD. I want you to understand this stuff on a kind of a simple level. So if I use a technical term, I'll try to use a synonym that makes it easy to understand. It shouldn't be that complex. And again, I understand it's not your field, and some of the terms that we use commonly are not, you're not familiar with, just like I'm not familiar with some technical terms. And after this, just to announce, we have a demo of the actual exercise system. We're going to go over to the fitness center, which is a couple hundred feet away, if you want to stay for that. Here's some of the issues. Change is different, okay? You'll see that if you're doing the same things you're doing now, nothing's going to change, okay? So if you want to change something, you have to do something different. Exercise versus activity. Unfortunately, a lot of information that's out there about how you should be active and this like that is very confusing. You know, planting tomatoes, walking in the mall is the same thing as climbing a mountain or running, you know, doing a triathlon. It's not the case, and we'll explain why. Fat is skinny, okay? Here's my little parable that I tell. I forgot to tell us before every seminar. There's an old guy on the side of the road digging a ditch with his hands, on his hands and knees, and he's bleeding from the knees and his fingers. He's got a big pile of dirt. You go by, say, geez, the poor guy. And you give him a brand new pick and shovel. And you say, wow, I've saved this guy. I'm his savior. You turn around and walk away, and he hits you in the back of the head with the shovel. Because you've just now shown him the error of his ways. This guy, I've been doing this for so many years, and now some of the stuff we're going to present to you is stuff that you haven't learned. We weren't taught in medical school and graduate school, but this is what the science and the real objective evidence shows. We're not selling anything. We're kind of relaying some information that we think is pertinent for you. Less is more when it comes to exercise. People get really enthused when they start and they do more and more and more, and it's not more exercise, it's the right kind of exercise. In fact, if you do the right kind of exercise, more is less. You cannot do the right kind of exercise for a very long period of time and very often. The same can always be new. People say to me, well, how long have you been doing this routine and how much do you exercise? Well, I say I exercise formally twice a week for about 14 minutes. Been doing that for over 40 years, that particular routine, okay? And nobody believes me. I say, well, then come and see what I do and you'll see what's going on. And they say, what exercises? Do you change your exercises so you can do this muscle confusion, which you hear on TV? Well, that's just a bunch of crap. And I say, I do the same exercises I did 40 years ago. They say, why? I say, because I have the same muscles I had 40 years ago with the same functions. When that changes, then maybe I'll change my routine. 60 is not 4 times 15. Our sessions take 15 minutes, pretty much to the dot. Some people can do them a little quicker. But doing 60 minutes, in the beginning, people say, can I do this 3 and 4 times a week? No, because it does not equal. It actually, the more you do of this, the more you have to recover, the less sufficient your recovery is going to be, and you're just beating your head against the wall, which my philosophy is get the biggest bang for your time and effort exercising that you can, the biggest bang for your buck. I'm going to go into global versus local. When you exercise, you have things that happen with the muscles that you're working, and globally, your cardiovascular system, your breathing, respiratory system, your hormone system, your endocrine system supports this stuff. So I'm going to go over that. That's a pretty important concept. 1 and 1 is 4. When trying to accomplish the goals that most of you want to try to accomplish, exercise and diet, 1 plus 1 is 4. Okay, it's synergistic. It's a multiple. If you combine these things properly, it's amazing. Where you can have somebody who can lose 35 pounds of fat exercising 15 minutes 10 times in 5 weeks. Where you can actually start to see changes in blood work and your lab work with just an application of a diet in as little as, you know, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. So 1 and 1 is 4. Put those two together, it's a very potent combination. And then, for the first time on our stage, that's my Ed Sullivan, right here on this stage, I come up with these ideas sometimes when I wake up. I say, wow, that'd be really clever. At least I think it'd be clever. So I was talking to Sean, who's finishing up his master's at ASU, and I said, I describe muscle fibers, and you'll see that coming up pretty soon. And I said, it's like Christmas tree lights. So I actually got some, and I'll show you, which I think is going to be very entertaining, at least to me. All right, in order to change, we must do something different. We've got to change our behavior, okay? That we said before. With regard to health and fitness, exercise and diet, is the way to go. I mean, those are the two most powerful tools we have available. Everyone's looking for the best exercise and the best diet. Well, Dr. Hilson and I have some ideas. Fortunately for you, the ideas are based upon science and long-term safe applications and consistent positive results. A lot of people have ideas about this stuff, and you just don't want to hear that. I mean, there's some crazy crap out there. How does the body talk? What are we trying to do? The body talks by sending chemical signals. When we eat, chemistry happens. When we exercise, chemistry happens. It sends signals for your organs, your functional capacity, different kinds of areas of performance and health to change. We're trying to send the right signals. No matter what you do, everybody's not going to exercise exactly the way I say, and some people get great results. That means they're sending the right signals to their systems to make good stuff happen. Okay? And if somebody here has a great exercise program, a great diet, it doesn't agree with anything I say, they're doing well, they're healthy, they feel good, they like it, God bless you. Because for 75% of the people, what I say is really pertinent, and for 25, maybe a little less than that. But if you're doing something and it's working and you're happy with it and you're healthy, don't even worry about it. In fact, if you want to leave now, I won't feel bad. All right, so we have to understand how to manipulate these variables. Okay, so bottom line is, the effectiveness of anything that we do, eating and diet, is what kind of chemistry do we produce when we're doing these kind of plans. The simple plan: exercise in order to produce beneficial chemical pathways, say to change your metabolism. That's why we want to exercise, to make certain chemistry happen. Eat to induce the desired advantageous chemistry. Eat so that we give our bodies a chance to do what it's designed to do, and genetically we were developed to do. So we've got to give our bodies a chance. That's the plan. The best way to eat, low carb. The best exercise that I've come up with is this SMART system, and I've tried and I've measured all the variables: time, effort, safety, productivity, longevity, application to different populations. It seems to be the best way, and I'm always trying to tweak it. Believe me, I am. And if something better comes up, I'll be right there. Activity versus exercise, really, really important. Activity, the government plans, articles, people should be more active. Okay, I don't know what that means. I mean, I guess it means don't sit and lie down, but it's very ill-defined. I mean, it's anything that's not sedentary. And actually, there's an advantage. Being sedentary is as harmful for you as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Okay, not doing something is just as harmful and deleterious and damaging to your health. So being active has certainly some benefits, and I recommend that you do it, and you'll see that later. Especially when it reverses a negative state of being inactive or sedentary. So rather than sitting on your butt all day long, if you get up and do something, if you do some walking, if you get around. But when people say to me, well, I have a really active job, so I don't need to exercise, it's a different thing. Sorry, it's a different animal. Exercise, the way I apply it, is a specific plan of mechanical work, which means moving, working your muscles, to produce the desired metabolic responses, to increase lean tissue, to increase your metabolic rate, to increase fat utilization, to have a more functional cardiovascular respiratory systems. The difference in the power of effect between activity and exercise is enormous. I mean, some of the things kind of overlap, but really they are different. And this exercise that I'm telling you about is the exercise part for sure, and I do want you to be active, but that's different. All right. A little bit of science, but I hope this works and helps you out a little bit. When we do exercise, when we move our muscles, we have different kinds of muscle fibers, okay? We start at the top. When we're just hanging out and walking around very slowly, we use the type 1 fibers. They burn available fuel, which is fat, called oxidative, so they use the most oxygen. They call them aerobic kind of fibers, have great endurance and very little strength. So if we go up the ladder and we want to do something a little more progressively demanding, then we have to go to the type 2A fibers. And in humans, this is orderly recruitment. Whenever these fibers are working as hard as they can and we have to work harder, then these fibers have to kick in. These still have to work as hard as they can. And we go to the next step where now we start to run at a pretty good pace, okay? This becomes a lesser of an endurance and a more of a strength kind of capacity. And these type 2B fibers, this is the holy grail. This is nirvana. You reach this stuff and a bunch of good stuff happens. And that's what we try to do in our sessions, okay? We try to reach these type 2B, they're called high-intensity fibers, but don't let high intensity scare you, okay? They have the highest, they burn sugar, glycogen they call it, okay? The lowest percentage of fat burning, but don't forget, when these are on, all your fat-burning fibers are working as hard as they can, so in effect, you are burning fat at a very high rate. They have low endurance, they draw a lot of energy, and they're the highest strength, they're the fight or flight, live or die muscle fibers, okay? So, now, Muscles work in what we call motor units. You have a motor neuron, which is this wire, okay? And these little lights are muscle fibers. Now, in the type 1 fibers, you have this string, and you have maybe one of these lights every foot and a half, and they're really dull. But you can keep it on forever. Doesn't draw much electricity, so you don't create much debt to the electric company. And that's the capacity. That's what type 1 fibers are. If I want more light, I want to light my place up a little more, I go to type 2 fibers, okay? So they have a little more lights per square. This motor unit turns on a lot of lights. And in the case of motor units, the nerve, the motor neuron, they call it, triggers muscle fibers. So in the type 2 fibers, down one, we have some more light, and it's a little more energy demanding, but you can still keep them on a long time without having a real big electric bill. When we really want to light the joint up a little bit, then we put on type 2AB fibers, and now I have, for this motor neuron, I got a bunch of fibers that are contracting. They're stronger, they can produce more power, but they use more energy, and they get tired a little quicker. If I want to light the bejesus out of my house and the whole neighborhood, okay, I go to type 2B fibers, and then you've got flashing lights and neon, a huge draw on my electric bill, but the biggest bang for my buck if I want to put on a show and a light show. So as we work up the strata, or down in that case, that's the difference in muscle fibers. Now, each one of those fiber groups, each one of these electric light deals, have different energy levels that they use, and they also have different metabolites. They produce different chemistry. Some produce more strength and hypertrophy, meaning muscle. Some produce more endurance and the enzymes and some of these signaling proteins that are more what we call oxidative or endurance. In SMART training, we try to get all of these fibers working in one shot. That's the beauty of the system. We get them all done in one shot. Your endurance, your strength, and all the benefits that you can do from any kind of exercise we get in this one session. SMART-X, the best exercise, okay? I think it's the best exercise because I've developed it to do exactly what I just explained. It's basically slow resistance training, and we'll show you if you want to come see what happens. We do major muscle groups. You do 1 set to failure. You're probably looking at 45 to 90 seconds for each set, and you do 1 set for each major muscle group. So you'll do a set for your biceps, you'll do a set for your legs, you'll do a set for your lats, upper body, chest, and so on. We do them in a sequence of large to small because the large muscles produce the most global response. They produce the highest return for supporting muscle work. We do that routine twice a week with at least 2 days in between because recovery is absolutely necessary. If you're trying to get a suntan, you can't stay in the sun 5 days in a row for 5 hours because you won't be able to accommodate that much stimulus. You're just going to get sun poisoning and blisters and burn. Same thing with exercise. So the purpose of the regimen is to stimulate all of those muscle fiber types that I showed you to a threshold level. Here's what threshold means. In physiology, once we get to a point of threshold, you can't get more threshold. Okay, it's like a rock at the end of a sheer cliff. If once I push it and it starts going, it's going. It's threshold, it's gonna happen. So once we get to that threshold level, we wanna stop. Because the more exercise we do, the harder it is to recover, and the more taxing it is on your joints and the attaching system, which is the limiting factor as we get older. So we wanna stimulate the 4 muscle fiber types, the fight or flight fibers, and we get the multiple benefits. We get more aerobic and cardiovascular benefits than if you did aerobic exercise by itself. We get more strength and muscle hypertrophy, bone density benefits than if you just did strength training by itself. So we've got kind of the biggest bang for our buck in the best possible scenario, and that's why I call it the best exercise. And if something changes and we learn something different, and believe me, I have 40 years of clinical experience with this, I have tweaked this thing every which way, and I keep coming up with the same answer. So, and that's it. Global versus local, misunderstood by almost everybody. When we exercise, stuff is happening here at the local level, in the muscle that you're working. But as a response to that, globally, your cardiovascular system, your heart rate goes up. Your vascular system, more blood happens, your vessels dilate. Your respiratory system goes up, okay? All of that is global, stemming from the local stimulus, stemming from the local happening, whatever's going on at the site of whatever muscle we're working. Traditionally, we thought the local effects were supposed to be just strength, and muscle building, and the global effects were cardiovascular or endurance. Wrong, okay? That's not the case. And for example, in a study that I presented to an international congress, it's an IRB scrutinized, FDA scrutinized, government scrutinized study, we had 50 people that did all ages from, I think, 18 to 74. 50 people that did twice a week SMART training, 15 minutes, exactly. We timed every repetition of every set of every person. And this was 5 weeks, so they did 10 sessions of 15 minutes. We had another group of 50 that did 3 hours and 20 minutes of cardiovascular exercise, target range, 85% max kind of thing, 3 hours and 20 minutes. At the end of the 5 weeks, when we measured, of course, the strength was higher in the SMART training group. Okay, we understood that. But body composition, for example, the people that did 15 minutes twice a week increased 8 pounds of lean tissue, which raised their metabolic rate 200 to 300 calories per day, which means without doing anything else, just the activity of that new muscle, okay, without doing anything else, they increased metabolic rate 250, 300 calories a day. It's like walking 2.5 to 3 miles without doing anything. That's just how you really start making some inroads. The aerobic group gained a pound of muscle and lost a half a pound of fat. Okay, so not that effective for that. As far as VO2 max, which is a measure of how much oxygen is supposed to be the gold standard of how aerobically fit you are, well, the aerobic group increased 11%, which is pretty significant. The SMART group that did 15 minutes twice a week improved 31%, 3 times as much as the cardio group in basically what was considered a cardiovascular test. Aerobic versus anaerobic. Okay, you hear this a lot. The most technically aerobic state you can get into regarding exercise is during the recovery from anaerobic exercise. Okay? After we recover from this training, we are now purely as we're going to get, which is called 0.7 respiratory quotient. That's about as purely meaning that for all the oxygen we breathe in, there's a certain amount of carbon dioxide we breathe out. That's the most fat-burning aerobic condition we can get into, 0.7, okay? And that's from recovery after anaerobic exercise. So it's the most aerobic, technically, we can get. And if people say, well, do I have to do aerobic exercise when I do this? I say, no, you don't, because this is as aerobic as you can get. You can't get any more aerobic than this. There's a little more science. High-intensity exercises releases catecholamines, which causes gut constriction. In other words, when we're doing this high-intensity exercise, everything kind of shuts down and supports the periphery, the muscles that are working, this stuff, arms, legs kind of stuff, okay? And it decreases what we call peripheral resistance. One of the problems and one of the benefits of exercise is to decrease resistance against which the heart is pumping, resistance in your arteries, okay? That's why hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, these kind of things are not good. We try to reverse that. All of this stuff that we're talking about, more blood flow, more venous return, increases cardiac output. Believe me, cardiac output is a good thing. How much volume, how much blood is your heart pumping with each beat? During exercise, the function of the cardiovascular system is to supply nutrients and to the muscles and to get rid of waste products, okay? Cardiovascular health and aerobic conditioning are confused. People think if I can run a marathon, I have great cardiovascular health, my cardiac risk is decreased and stuff like that. They are not really that much related. Cardiovascular health refers to the ability of the heart and the bloodstream to supply what the muscles need. The muscle system, I think, is the most underrated system in our bodies when it comes to health. It is the generator. It makes your cardiovascular system, your nervous system, your endocrine system, your skeletal system, all these systems work. If we didn't have skeletal muscles and didn't do exercise, our brains would be smaller, our hearts would be smaller, our lungs would be smaller, our blood vessels wouldn't be as compliant and elastic, wouldn't have to be. It's muscle movement and muscle action that really determines a lot of these conditions. Aerobic conditioning relates to adaptation to a specific performance. So aerobic conditioning is the ability for you to run faster and longer, swim harder, cycle, but it has a very nebulous effect, seriously, on your cardioprotective mechanism, how healthy you're going to be in your vascular system and your heart function. Okay, so the fact that somebody can run a marathon and die, it has to do with a lot of other things. Okay, though I'm saying it's bad for you, no, but don't think that you have to do this and be a high-level performer to have good cardioprotective, lower your cardiac risk, be healthier. Here's a little more science. It was thought when I was going to school, and even up till now probably, that resistance training causes peripheral vascular resistance. In other words, when you're doing exercise, high intensity, what we call high intensity exercise, which is a little misnomer anyway, but that you're shutting off blood flow. Well, that's because people don't understand how blood flow and how muscle fibers work. When you're doing an exercise, people would think, well, you want to do pumping exercise because that pumps blood back. But when you contract a muscle, even in a very slow method like we do, the muscle fibers, those little Christmas tree lights, are firing like crazy. They are producing pumping. They are increasing, flow. They're also making the blood vessels dilate, get bigger. So we have less. We're making the hose bigger, that the blood flows through, and we're decreasing resistance. We're unleashing pressure because we're returning blood back to the heart, basically. So resistance training actually causes more venous return. When you're in this kind of diastole, systolic, diastolic blood pressure, well, the diastolic is basically your artery, your veins squeezing, sending blood back to your heart. And muscle action helps that happen. So you get more venous return, which is really a healthy thing. You have decreased peripheral resistance, and what we call end diastolic pressure is increased. So for my students here and my docs, so there's more blood going to that heart to fill, to pump back out. And it also, interestingly enough, and not many people know this, there's a relaxation phase. You know when you have an EKG, you have a contraction and a contraction, but there's a relaxation phase in that. And the backwash from that is during a relaxation actually feeds the coronary arteries, your heart arteries, the ones that get blocked with 99% blockage and you need surgery. The backwash during this kind of high-intensity exercise actually promotes blood flow to those specific coronary arteries so that they won't get blocked and they're more healthy. In my research, I've done stuff with inflammation, inflammatory diseases, performance, health, lean body programs. The recurrent theme that I come across is taxing those type 2B fibers, the Christmas lights that go like crazy, neon and all that, If we do that, when I look at diabetes studies, when I look at arthritis studies, when I look at cardiovascular studies, when I look at metabolic rate studies, they keep coming up, type 2B fibers, That's what we're trying to get to, and that's why in the SMART program we go to muscle failure. We try to get that kind of chemistry happening. There's an adrenaline response that releases free fatty acids and hormone-sensitive lipase. I'm going to give you a little deal on fat so people can understand this. Constantly in our bodies, there's a cycle of fat. We have fat that flows, it's called free fatty acids, and that supplies your lungs and your heart and your skin and everything else. That's your normal metabolism. And fat is also stored as triglyceride, which we don't want to have too much of, especially we don't want to have it so much that it goes into our blood. That's why they measure triglycerides in your blood. So this cycle happens, storage and usage. Storage and usage, looks like any other physiological cycle. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get the usage part, the flow part of this fat at a higher level and disproportionate to the storage. We don't want the storage to happen more, we want the usage to happen more. We want to get rid of fat, we want it's healthy if we can make that thing happen functionally. Cardiovascular exercise does that nominally. High intensity exercise does that because it releases adrenaline. Adrenaline is, again, those fight or flight, live or die muscle fibers get activated and you get an adrenaline response. That's why, the lady lifts up the car with one hand and takes her kid out from under it with another. It's an adrenaline response. Also, muscle-mediated anti-inflammatories. I'm working with these arthritic kids at Johns Hopkins, They can't move because they have this juvenile arthritis, so they don't do anything. So there's a vicious cycle. They get osteoporosis when they're 18 years old. They become diabetic very young. So how do we get these kids to move? Well, we get them to move slowly, which is what we're doing. It doesn't hurt them. And they're producing these kind of signaling proteins, this IL-6 is interleukin-6, that actually produces an anti-inflammatory response. So think about it. When we exercise, we produce a little bit of upheaval, a little bit of inflammation here, A reasonable system, when it senses this, there's some inflammation going on, your global system produces an anti-inflammatory response. That's why rheumatoid people, arthritic people, when they do something and move, which sounds like pouring gasoline on a fire, actually feel better. Now we know why. We produce these signaling proteins, so that's another thing that we do when we do our system. When we have glycogen depletion, it improves protein uptake, so we get more muscle and more bone density, and increases insulin sensitivity, and Dr. Hills will go into that and explain that. Produces norepinephrine and dopamine. This is interesting. Increased norepinephrine and dopamine enhance brain function. Norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter that sends a stronger signal. Dopamine takes out the white noise. It makes the nerve impulse more clear. It makes the transmission to the brain more clear. Kids that have ADHD have lesser levels of that. And if we can increase those levels, We can increase test scores. We can increase attention span. We can increase all kinds of things. And lastly, glycogen depletion has a cardioprotective effect because it increases our ability to increase our VO2 max, or deliver oxygen when we do exercises that actually deplete this glycogen. All right. Right now, I'm announcing this for the first time to the world. Here's my deal, okay? I've got some books up here that are wonderful books, okay? Very good friend of mine, award-winning science writer. Good Calories, Bad Calories, pretty large book. He said, why we get fat and what to do about it is the idiot's, idiot's version of the Good Calories, Bad Calories. In any case, good friend of mine, guy's an exerciser, and in his book he says, which is a little controversial, he says, eating low carbs is what works for you, and I agree with all of that. But he says exercise has not been shown to be effective in weight loss. And he's actually right. Because in the studies where they measure exercise, they measure aerobic exercise. And it has very little to do with burning fat, okay, decreasing body fat. And here is why I think, and I've come up with this is one of my, you wake up and I found this out or I felt it. My hypothesis is that aerobic exercises uses fat that's in circulation. Remember I told you have circulating fat and you have stored fat. So this is constantly happening. So when you start to do aerobic exercise, which is lower level, those lower muscle fibers that I was talking about kind of exercise, walking, jogging, stuff like that, your body draws from that cycle of fat that's circulating and uses it. So Gary says in his book that exercise just makes you tired and hungry. So you slow down your metabolism and you eat more. Well, he may be right, because he's not selling anything. He's a pretty objective guy. I think you're tired and hungry from exercise if you do aerobic exercise, because you're using that fat that's normally circulating that goes to your lungs and your heart and your liver, and okay, I think you're drawing from that. You're actually just using it. So you have now a deficit. When you get done, your body says, hey, I don't have enough energy to do my regular metabolism stuff, so slow down and eat, okay? However, anaerobic exercise, those type 2B fibers, that stuff I was talking about, draws fat out of storage because of the adrenaline response. And there's a whole bunch of cascading metabolism. There's a bunch of stuff that happens, okay, once that adrenaline happens. And you look at these pathways, and it's undeniable physiology, chemistry. Okay, I didn't make it up, I don't sell it. This is what happens. Because of that adrenaline response, okay, it draws fat out of circulation, out of storage. And now we have plenty of energy. In fact, we might sometimes have too much energy. And if you don't think adrenaline has a serious effect on eating and activity, we don't become tired and hungry, because effectively we're on crack. Okay, have you ever seen a crack addict has enormous adrenaline response? Those people can't sit still. They're always moving, so they ain't sedentary, okay, and they're never hungry. And they burn fat like crazy, okay? A little bit of a gross analogy, but you get the point. Adrenaline makes us healthy crack addicts. It's legal. All right. People ask me, what's the ideal plan? If you had nothing better to do, which I really don't, what would you do for exercise and activity, all right? The SMART training that we're going to show you, the twice a week high-intensity stuff, that's mandatory, okay? Advised is that you do some cardio. Now, I don't advise you do cardio where you're running up and down, squaw peak, and falling on the ground, unless you're training for something. But that kind of cardio, and I consider walking and bicycling, stuff like that, I really advise it. And a lot of my followers kind of in slow training. And by the way, latest estimate is that there are 1 million people around the world that use slow resistance training now. So my mother would be very proud. She didn't know what I did for the first 20 years. But anyway, it's kind of cool. But and they say, no, you just, you do once or twice a week, you do the training, and they said, then lie in a coffin. They want you to just recover. I mean, to me, that's just goofy. So that's your activity kind of stuff, some cardio. I suggest that you do some flexibility, some stretching. Okay, I really think, especially as you get older, but when you're younger, it's so much easier to maintain, a good level of flexibility, and it's functional. You get out of the car easier, you get out of bed easier, you do a lot of stuff with less stress and wear and tear. Okay, so flexibility, even if it's I do 5-6 minutes in the morning, 6-7 minutes at night. That's just part of my routine. And then optionally, recreational stuff. You want to hike, you want to do stuff. I mean, there's so many benefits psychologically to this stuff, and also physiologically. But I mean, this is kind of the order in which, and if somebody says they don't have enough time to exercise, I say, if you don't have 2 times a week, 15 minutes, then we're in trouble, okay? The 3 reasons people don't exercise: I don't have enough time, I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt, I don't get any results. 15 minutes twice a week, there's the time. I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt. 40 years of training, world-class athletes, rehab patients, and everybody in between, nobody's gotten hurt. I've heard a couple of guys' feelings because I beat them into the ground when they asked me to, but nobody got physically hurt. And as far as returns on your effort, within 3 weeks we can measure, and within maybe 4 or 5 exercise sessions you can actually see a difference. And that's I can show you probably a couple hundred case studies over in the fitness center. Okay, this is a little bit, I'm being a little cute, here. Exercise can and diet can't, increased metabolic rate. So, believe me, diet is absolutely important. Without diet, this stuff is a slow process and probably isn't going to work that well. But exercise can increase metabolic rate, increase cardiovascular function, increase it. Acutely change your brain chemistry. Really, really important. Great book, Spark. Dr. Ate, a psychiatrist from Harvard, on the effectiveness of exercise on the brain function. Kids that do 20, 30 minutes of exercise before the SATs score a standard deviation higher than kids that don't. In a high school in Naperville, where they got these kids, it's outside of Chicago, these kids were upper middle class kind of school and ranked about 16th in the world standards for math and science. After a year of real exercise, not just PE, kick the ball out, dribble around, okay? Real exercise measured, came out number 1 in the world in science and number 4 or 5 in the world in math. There's study after study that shows exercise, and the higher intensity, the more we get these neurotransmitters, good stuff happening. Offsetting, Duke study, offsetting depression as well as Zoloft, anxiety, Alzheimer's, interesting. Okay, if you can reduce plaque in your heart, you can certainly reduce it in your brain. It's the same function, basically. And magnify the fat release, remember the crack thing. Increase growth factors. There are signals that you send out, these proteins that make cells regenerate. That's really what youthful metabolism is about, increasing growth factors, keeping that kind of a level up. Build muscle and bone. Most of my gals, not most, but very, very many of my gals that come in 50s and 60s on Fosamax after 6 months, don't have to use it. We build bone. When you build muscle, skeletal muscle, you build bone appropriately, accordingly. It produces what they call heat shock proteins and hormone-sensitive lipase. There's an enzyme that when you're active, when you're working these muscles at a high intensity, triggers the release, makes your cells more able to use fat and use it up as opposed to store it. There's another one, liposensitive lipase, which does the opposite, which when you get pregnant, you get those enzymes elevate in your butt and your hips, and those things are important. But exercise can change that. So tax those fight or flight muscle fibers, and you do a lot of good stuff, and that's, again, what we do. Eating. The best eating you can do is related to whatever chemical pathways will induce fat control. That's what we're trying to do, control fat. So Dr. Hills will go into that pretty extensively and show you how that can happen. The signals that induce or inhibit fat control actually are the ones that signal fat storage. Let me talk about insulin just for a second, and Dr. Hills again will go into that. Insulin's nasty. If you wanted to take a drug or a molecule in your body to make you fat, it would be insulin. Okay, so we try to do everything in our eating to reduce insulin, which means that we want to eat low carbs. Okay, there's no question about it. Carbohydrates primarily induce insulin response. So you eat carbs, you get an insulin response. You get an insulin response, and it limits fat. It limits fat usage and drives fat storage. Therefore, limiting carbohydrates reduces fat storage. I can't say it any more simply than that. Thank you.